In the heart of the night, three siblings walk through the cold hospital corridors with wide, fearful eyes. David, Lenna, and Evan, bound by the same fear, losing forever the one person who had always been their entire world. The sharp smell of disinfectant, the steady beeping of machines, and, at the center of it all, the inevitable goodbye. When Brittany, their mother, looks at them for the last time, her words become a code to the unknown. She hands them an envelope, not just paper, but a ticket to a mystery that begins the very moment her heart falls silent. Inside that envelope beats a whispered command: find Judge Charles Miller in New York. Through tears and promises, the siblings set out for a massive city where every corner hides stories, dangers, and secrets. And then, standing before the door of the unknown man, something impossible happens. When Charles Miller sees the trio, his face turns pale and time seems to freeze. Those young eyes hold answers to questions he never dared to ask. And now, all of them, the siblings and the judge, stand on the edge of a truth powerful enough to turn the world upside down. Brittany and John met when they were very young, in a small town where dreams felt as distant as the stars. They were too young to understand the future, but they knew they had found something rare: true love. They married early, perhaps before the world was ready for them, but in their hearts, there was a simple and powerful certainty. Even amid poverty, what they lacked in material things was more than made up for by an abundance of affection and hope. David, Lenna, and Evan were born into this atmosphere of intense love. David, at 15, was the protector, the first to understand he had to be strong to keep the family together. Lenna, sweet and brave at 12, had the curious gaze of someone who listens more than the world wants to reveal. And Evan, the youngest, only 7 years old, was the light that brightened their darkest days with his innocent smile. Yes, they were poor, and many nights they went to bed hungry or cold, but one thing they never lacked was love. John worked hard in a local factory, a simple, honest man who gave his all to support his family. Brittany, in turn, was the invisible strength of the home, holding everything together through everyday struggles and rare moments of joy. She was vital. The family was happy, perhaps in the truest sense of the word, but a ghost loomed over them. Ben Miller, the children's maternal grandfather and Brittany's father, a cold and calculating man who owned a billion-dollar empire that seemed untouchable. To him, the world operated by strict rules, and love was not one of them, at least not the way Brittany and John understood it. Ben had never accepted his daughter's marriage to a poor man. When he learned of their union, he felt as though that decision had permanently stained his bloodline and his honor. Without hesitation, he disowned Brittany, cut off all communication, and, worse yet, formally disinherited her. In that cruel act, the billionaire sealed the chasm he never figured out how to cross, shutting a door he never imagined would ever open again. The pain of this self-imposed exile was a burden Brittany carried in silence, but she faced it with courage and love. John, always by her side, gave her the strength to carry on. Yet fate, relentless, unfolded its tragedy with brutal force. One fateful morning, John suffered a workplace accident, the kind that shocks with its suddenness and senseless cruelty. He was gone forever, leaving Brittany to face the world alone, raising 3 children without the protection or embrace of her husband. The emptiness felt greater than the possibilities ahead. But fate still had one final card to play. A year later, just as a light seemed to finally shine for the family, Brittany fell ill, suddenly, viciously, and beyond cure. Within days, the life that had radiated love and hope began to fade. One look at her tired face was enough to know the end was near. In that public hospital, surrounded by sterile walls and the constant beeping of machines, David, Lenna, and Evan felt their world collapse. Brittany, with the little strength she had left, called them close, pulled them into a tight embrace, and handed them an envelope, one that weighed heavier than their young hearts could bear. "You have to find Judge Charles Miller in New York. He's the only person you can trust," she said, her voice trembling, yet firm. Inside that envelope was a key to the unknown, an address written in shaky handwriting, and enough money for the journey. It was a ticket to a new path, a final mission of love and mystery left by their mother. When Brittany closed her eyes for the last time, the siblings held each other tightly, promising to protect one another no matter what. The journey to New York was a whirlwind of emotions and uncertainty. The concrete jungle of the big city felt like a completely different world. On each face, pain and hope collided, a fragile hope clutched tightly in Brittany's envelope. The encounter with Judge Charles Miller was a moment frozen in time. When he opened the door, the man standing before them froze. His wide eyes couldn't believe what they saw. David, Lenna, and Evan weren't just unfamiliar children, they were his sister Brittany's kids. He had no idea he had nieces and a nephew. A deep shock overtook the judge. The past, long buried, returned with overwhelming force, carrying revelations that threatened to unravel everything he thought he knew. The broken relationship with his sister, the family impasse with Ben, the secret he never imagined he might be part of. It all weighed heavily on his conscience as he looked at the siblings, so young, yet so full of hope and sorrow. And so began a new chapter, where grief, hidden truths, and a powerful legacy of family collided in a story full of tension and deep emotion. Fate, ever relentless, had already drawn the next steps for the siblings, and for the judge, who, despite everything, could no longer deny the blood that bound them. The coldness of Judge Charles Miller's office did not reflect the storm of emotions raging in his heart. There, amid piles of case files, stamps, and heavy furniture, the man who had always been firm now faltered in the face of the unexpected presence of those three siblings. David, Lenna, and Evan, their eyes filled with hope, sorrow, and unanswered questions, had just crossed the veil of everything Charles thought he knew about his family, a family he believed was lost forever. Charles had loved Brittany, his sister, in a way few could understand. They shared a quiet bond, a deep connection that only siblings truly know. He had always stood by her side, even when their father, Ben Miller, disowned her and secrets began building walls between them. When Brittany chose to leave, separating herself from a home shattered by pride and resentment, Charles felt like a part of his soul had been torn away. The pain of her absence was deep and silent, buried beneath the image of a powerful man, a respected judge who rarely showed emotion. But today, all of that resurfaced. When the siblings arrived at his office, Charles's first reaction was pure shock. He couldn't even finish the sentence. Seeing David, whose face so clearly mirrored Brittany's, hearing Lenna speak with the same gentle tone as her mother, and looking at Evan, who carried the shy smile of his father, it was too much. The impact nearly knocked the ground out from under his feet. The apparent coldness of the judge, feared and respected by so many, melted in that moment, revealing a devastated man struck by a truth that had long festered like an unhealed wound. He welcomed the siblings with a mix of hesitation and urgency. He couldn't let them wander alone in a city so vast, nor allow them to face life unprotected. But at the same time, he knew he had to guard a secret far bigger than the reunion of a broken family. That very night, Charles took David, Lenna, and Evan to his home. Inside, the silence wasn't empty. It was heavy with memories, with unmade decisions, and the looming uncertainty of what was to come. Love can be a trap in disguise, and Anna, Charles's wife, knew exactly how to build that kind of invisible prison. From the moment she began dating Charles Miller, she sank her roots deep into the life of the respected judge, blurring the lines of the man of integrity he had once been. Her influence was subtle but powerful. Every word, every gesture wove a web that slowly consumed the best parts of Charles until he became a reflection of the greed and corruption that Anna so carefully nurtured. As a judge, his impartiality crumbled under the weight of personal interests. As a man, his ambition grew insatiable, shaped by the promises of wealth and the seductive glow of the Miller family fortune. Anna was not merely a partner. She was the architect of his moral downfall, the voice that coaxed his heart into shutting its doors to what was right. When David, Lenna, and Evan walked into his office, bearing the marks of pain and hidden truths, Charles's mind didn't turn to compassion or love. Instead, a cold, calculating fear took hold of him, echoing a single thought. My father must never find out about these grandchildren. If he does, he'll change the will, and I'll have to share the inheritance with these three. To Charles, the reality was crystal clear. These children weren't just Brittany's unknown offspring. They were obstacles. Obstacles to the power and plans he had spent years carefully constructing. The affection he showed, the words of welcome, were nothing more than masks, thin veils hiding his true motive: to protect the family fortune and maintain absolute control over the aging billionaire Ben Miller's empire. Anna shared that goal. To her, the siblings posed a direct threat to the luxurious life she had built alongside Charles. That's why nothing in that shaken household was real. Not the care, not the concern. Everything was a power play, a calculated strategy to keep the children under surveillance, far from their grandfather and away from any potential changes that their presence could trigger. Charles knew Ben Miller, even in illness, remained sharp and watchful. The billionaire, still lucid and ruthless, could break his long silence and change everything with a single legal stroke. He would not allow that. The revelation of his sister's children meant a whirlwind of risk, not just to his fortune, but to his status and to the control he wielded over the family's legacy. So welcoming the siblings was not about protection or genuine love. It was about containment. They had to remain under his roof, isolated from the outside world, kept in the dark while time passed and destiny unfolded on his and Anna's terms. Behind the respectable facade of the judge and Anna's elegant poise, there was a silent dance of hidden agendas and ruthless manipulation. Power and greed had hollowed out Charles's heart, and that shadow now loomed over the young siblings, trapped, unaware that they were entangled in a web far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. David had always been a different kind of boy. From a very young age, he displayed a sharp intelligence and a keen ability to notice details most people would overlook. At 15, he carried a maturity that set him apart, not only from the innocence of his younger siblings, but also from most teens his age. That sharpness was both a blessing and a curse. It allowed him to read behind masks, to decipher hidden intentions, but it also made it impossible for him to ignore the harsh reality surrounding them. It had only been a few weeks since they arrived at Uncle Charles's house. The mansion, imposing and cold, was far from a home. Their days were marked by rigid routines and suspicious glances, not from the children, but from Judge Charles and Anna, whose presence dominated the halls with an almost suffocating aura. In that house, silence reigned. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a silence charged with tension and secrets buried deep. David began to notice something his heart didn't want to accept. What surrounded them wasn't care or protection. It was a quiet surveillance, a constant watchfulness, not the warm refuge Brittany, their mother, had imagined for them. When he first heard the whispers between Uncle Charles and Aunt Anna, he thought maybe it was just his imagination. But one night, too conveniently early to be coincidence, he realized it wasn't. Hidden behind a half-open door, David overheard a conversation that changed everything. The words were sharp, cold, disguised under an almost casual tone, but they carried a devastating truth. As long as the old man is alive, they have to stay here, in silence. They can't find out anything, or my father will want to change the will and split everything with them. That's a headache we don't need. Anna nodded with a cold smile. They're temporary problems, Charles. Once Ben's gone, we'll send them to an orphanage far from here. With any luck, no one will remember those three. David felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Rage ignited in his chest like a fire that refused to be put out. How could they so casually decide the fate of him, Lenna, and Evan? How could they treat them like disposable pieces, obstacles to be discarded once they outlived their usefulness? That moment changed everything for David. He decided he would no longer be just a passive witness to it all. In the days that followed, he looked at Anna and Charles with different eyes. His uncle, once a distant and mysterious figure, was now the center of a silent conspiracy threatening his family. And that elegant, smiling, imposing woman was far from an ordinary aunt. She was the mastermind behind the cruel game they had fallen into. Luckily, there was one light in that dark house: Rose, the cook. Rose was more than just a staff member. She was an ally, someone David quickly realized was essential to keeping their hope alive. She carried memories of that family long before the pain the children were now facing. Rose knew Brittany and Charles's history well. She had once been their nanny when they were babies and held a near maternal affection for them. The kitchen was her refuge, a space where she adjusted not only recipes, but also her strategies to protect those she could. When David, summoning all the courage he had left, decided to tell Rose what he had overheard that night, she didn't hesitate. Her eyes filled with tears, but also with a fierce determination. Rose swore to herself that this dark secret would not become those children's fate. And so began a secret alliance. Rose moved in the shadows, avoiding obvious risks. She knew Charles and Anna were dangerous, and that one wrong step could make things even worse for the siblings. She began observing the household's routines, Charles's comings and goings, the staff's schedules, looking for an opening to act. David, in turn, trained his mind to question everything and everyone except Rose and his siblings.
Charles's greed, fueled by Anna, made it increasingly difficult to maintain the image of the good guardians they both portrayed to social services and to anyone observing from the outside. That's why their actions were meticulously calculated, aimed at hiding the existence and true identity of the children from the elderly billionaire, Ben Miller. Rose knew that the only hope for David, Lenna, and Evan lay beyond the walls of that mansion, directly with their grandfather, who, though distant and cold, had stopped condemning Brittany during the final moments of his lucidity. But how to build that bridge? It wasn't easy. Ben Miller lived in seclusion in a countryside estate, his physical strength diminished, overtaken by the illness that was draining his energy. Still, his piercing gaze and sharp mind made him more watchful than anyone imagined. He knew many wanted to take advantage of his decline, and that the revelation of his grandchildren could shake the strong foundations he had built. Rose, with her experience and knowledge of the family's inner workings, knew that a direct visit from the grandchildren would not be allowed. Charles was far too careful about that, and Anna even more so. That's why Rose began to craft a plan to do what seemed impossible, to bring the grandchildren closer to Ben without their uncle or Anna finding out. Every word exchanged with the staff who cared for Ben, every smile she drew from the servants and nurses in that country mansion was a step toward building the future those siblings so desperately needed. And David, Not only the eldest, but the strategic mind of the small group gave Rose strength in her moments of doubt. The bond between them was solidifying like an unbreakable chain, capable of withstanding any pressure or threat. Although the nights were marked by silence and worry, something was beginning to shift within that drama of secrets and betrayal. Hope. But danger lurked, always present. Charles, even if he didn't show it, remained constantly watchful. He knew that any sign of closer ties could cause his empire to collapse. And Anna, with her boundless ambition, was always ready to cut off any possibility of threat. Together, they formed an almost unshakable wall, surrounding the siblings with dark intentions. However, there was something they didn't understand: the strength of sibling love, the courage born from injustice, and the determination of a simple yet powerful woman, Rose. She was ready to face whatever it took to ensure Brittany's legacy was not lost, and that the children of such a strong woman would not be swallowed by the shadows of greed. And as that silent battle unfolded, the puzzle began to reveal its first pieces, signaling that the game had only just begun, and that truth held a power no billionaire, judge, or manipulator could suppress forever.
Winter had fallen heavily over the city, and the wind blowing through the windows of Charles's mansion was merely a reflection of the coldness that ruled the hearts of those who plotted in the dark. But inside the house, among the aromas of fresh bread and the steam rising from pots, an idea was taking shape. Rose remained committed to the impossible: to reunite David, Lenna, and Evan with their grandfather before time ran out for all of them. With the clever humility of the meek, Rose approached one of the nurses who cared for Ben Miller, a soft-spoken young woman and an old acquaintance who remembered Rose from when she was a nanny. Between a cake left as a gift and a kind word at the gate, a quiet alliance began to form, like a seed planted in fertile soil. It was the start of a plan, a silent web woven in the hope that long-buried secrets might finally be brought to light. One morning, taking advantage of a rare moment when Charles was away at a meeting and Anna slept off a late-night party, Rose led the three siblings to the back gate. The nurse's car waited for them, a discreet taxi with tinted windows that hid more than passengers. It protected a fragile thread of hope. On the way to Ben Miller's mansion, David's heart pounded with nervous anticipation. Lenna whispered quiet prayers, and Evan, tightly holding his sister's hand, only wished that this time things would be different, that somewhere the world held a safe place for them. When they finally arrived, Ben sat frozen in his armchair, eyes locked on the door as if expecting a ghost. He was speechless when he faced his unknown grandchildren, the living mirror of the daughter he had lost. For a moment, the man hardened by power and solitude looked small, just an old man before the one thing his fortune had never been able to buy: a family. The reunion was a mix of silence, tears, and broken words. Ben asked for forgiveness, eyes filled with tears, and showered the grandchildren with questions, desperately trying to make up in minutes for the time lost to pride. The weight of the past lingered, but in Evan's shy giggle, Lenna's tight hug, and David's steady gaze, there was redemption. Ben reacted like never before. He immediately called his trusted lawyer, a man of integrity, and ordered something that would change everything. "I want to rewrite my will. My fortune will be shared fairly among my grandchildren. In them, I now find the true meaning of everything I've built." But Charles was quick to sense that his plan was in danger. Using his influence over the lawyer, he applied pressure, manipulated, and paid enough to ensure that the new will would never see the light of day. The document, which should have changed lives, vanished as if it were nothing more than a scrap of paper. Ben didn't survive long after the reunion.
The emotional toll and the weight of years spent in loneliness hastened his end. When news of his death spread, Charles couldn't hide his relief. Now, finally, nothing stood in his way of becoming the sole heir. The mask of false compassion gave way to quiet celebration, shared only with Anna, who couldn't hide her triumphant smile. But neither Charles nor Anna knew the true danger was coming from where they least expected. Rose, always observant and loyal, armed herself with discretion and technology. She had placed small recorders throughout the house, capturing incriminating conversations between Charles, Anna, and the lawyer. Irrefutable evidence of their schemes, confessions of sabotage, and plans to destroy the siblings' future. She gathered it all: audio, video, documents. At Ben's funeral, while Charles played his role before the press and Anna paraded crocodile tears, Rose did the unthinkable. She approached a trusted police investigator and handed him a thick envelope filled with recordings, copies of the sabotaged will, and a detailed journal of the manipulation the children had endured. The scandal exploded. Charles, caught off guard, was arrested in his own office, resisting in vain. Anna, cornered, confessed to part of the crimes in exchange for a lighter sentence. The media and the justice system showed no mercy to the man who had once been a symbol of integrity. Before the entire nation, the truth came out. The rightful heirs to the Miller fortune were David, Lenna, and Evan. But more than money, what they inherited that day was the right to write their own story, free from the shadows of the past. And beside them, no longer hidden by fear or secrecy, stood Rose, no longer just a cook, but someone who had proven that loyalty, courage, and love are worth more than any inheritance.
Amid the chaos of the scandal, something new and quiet began to bloom in the hearts of David, Lenna, and Evan. It wasn't just relief from seeing justice done. It was the rediscovery of what it meant to belong, to have a home, to be seen and recognized not as a threat, but as family. With Charles and Anna finally removed from their lives, the children received far more than an inheritance. They gained the freedom to be themselves, for the first time since they lost Brittany. The court's decision came swiftly. After all the evidence presented by Rose and the tireless work of the children's defense lawyers, a judge, known for his honesty, was firm in his ruling. All of Ben Miller's accumulated wealth was to be legally transferred to his grandchildren. Looking straight into David, Lenna, and Evan's eyes, he said, "Now it's your turn to write the story of this name." Adjusting to their new life took time. There were still scars. Nights when Lenna woke from nightmares of their time in Charles's mansion, days when David felt the unbearable pressure of deciding which path to follow, and moments when Evan, the youngest, wondered if everything would vanish, just like their parents had. But there was something steady and growing that united them: Rose. She was officially named their legal guardian. At first, she was overwhelmed by the responsibility, but quickly accepted it with the humility and love of someone with a great soul. She transformed their new home, now a warm, welcoming house, into a safe nest, filled with memories of Brittany and, little by little, new celebrations, achievements, and laughter. With resources and freedom, they could have chosen a life of luxury, travel, and indulgence. But the pain of their past taught them that abundance only has meaning when it serves a greater purpose. Inspired by Rose's example and the memory of their parents, they made a decision that surprised everyone. They chose not to live just for themselves. David led the conversation. "We can't forget where we came from, those nights when we felt invisible, like the kids who never got a second chance." Lenna added, "There are so many out there like us, orphans, without homes, without anyone to believe in them." The idea came gently, but quickly took shape. They would create an institution to shelter and rebuild the dreams of homeless children.
The project was first sketched out by hand, simply in Brittany's old notebook, lovingly kept by Rose. It soon became a concrete plan. They bought a large plot of land, opened the doors to partners and volunteers, assembled multidisciplinary teams, and most importantly, invested their time, energy, and hope every single day. The institution didn't just carry the Miller name, it came to life. A large house with walls covered in colorful drawings and windows always open to laughter. Children came from all over, some suspicious, others hungry, many with lost eyes. For every new arrival, Rose personally stood at the gate to offer the first hug and say, "Here you are part of something bigger. Here you will be loved." David focused on education, always encouraging curiosity and learning. Lenna cared for the little ones, creating spaces filled with play, music, and warmth, bringing light to those who arrived carrying so much pain. Evan, who had already learned so much about resilience, became everyone's friend, the one who listened, who shared his toys, who taught others to never give up. With the help of a team of psychologists, educators, volunteer doctors, and many former staff members who admired Rose, the institution became a reference. It earned awards, attracted media attention, and most importantly, multiplied dreams. Orphaned children stopped merely watching time pass. They began building futures. They learned to smile again, to trust, to believe that destiny can indeed change for the better. Now and then, at night, when the house was silent and all the lights were off, Rose would sit on the porch with the siblings and gaze at the stars. Sometimes it felt as though the stars whispered the names Brittany and John, and it was as if they were right there, proud of the path of love and courage their children had chosen. Many had said that the fortune could have ended in scandal or in the wrong hands, but its greatest legacy was this: turning suffering into hope, loneliness into family, pain into a chain of love that would stretch across generations. In the end, every chapter of the Miller siblings saga served to show that blood ties do matter, but it's our choices that truly define who we are. And the story is only just beginning. Did you enjoy this journey filled with emotion, twists, and hope? If you'd like to follow more inspiring stories like this one, subscribe to our channel. That way, you won't miss a single adventure. See you in the next chapter.